Coming straight from Stratford, it says Iran will accept the additional protocol to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty on the condition that the West remove all sanctions and allow the continuation of civilian nuclear activities. Iranian lawmaker Ahmad Shohan and Evaz Haydapur said, IRNA reported on July 2nd. The additional protocol is a key demand of the P5+1 negotiators in ongoing talks with Iran and would require broader international access to nuclear sites and expanded declaration of nuclear activities. Iran had signed the protocol in 2003 but suspended it 2 years later. Well, I can assure you, if the U.S. and the P5+1 have gone this far with the nuclear negotiations with Iran, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion, I believe anyway, that this treaty will eventually go through, and Israel will have little to say about it. Well, frankly, I believe this will be a part of a larger, broader agreement that I believe will include Syria, Iran, the moderate Arab states, Israel, and many. But you might see the Iranian P5+1 agreements going forward, but I think in the long run this all will be put together and under one agreement, and it will normalize relationships with Israel and the moderate Arab world, and it'll put the moderate Arab world and Israel at ease, supposedly, that Iran's nuclear program is under control. But in the near future, I believe that Iran will sign a peace accord with the West, and the West will drop many of the sanctions, or some of them anyway, to give Iran a little bit of breathing room internationally. But eventually it will be an all-encompassing peace accord that will, I believe, will include not only Iran but Syria as well. Now here's another intelligence analysis from Stratford regarding the Islamic State and what their future does hold. And the title of it is "The Islamic State Tries to Ward Off U.S. Intervention in Iraq." And for those who think that this Islamic State is just going to sweep across the Middle East, it's simply not going to happen. In fact, they're scared to death that the United States is going to get involved in with Iraq, and they would be pretty much wiped out. And this is what they said: the Islamic State has grown and thrived due to the largesse of the Sunni sheiks and the absence of U.S. pressure on the group. As the United States began to offer measured support to the Iraqi government, the group formerly known as the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant launched a propaganda campaign threatening the United States with violence if it intervened. While the group's ability to back up its threat is limited, a terrorist attack on the U.S. homeland by the group or a grassroots sympathizer could bring the full wrath of the United States down upon the militants, shattering any slim hope of reestablishing the caliphate. So even though the Islamic State has kind of threatened the United States, they certainly don't want some terrorist action to take place on the mainland of the United States, causing an Afghanistan type attack upon this terrorist group. And I call them a terrorist group because frankly that's what they are. Going on with the article, says, anticipating the deepening involvement of the United States in Iraq, the Islamic State and supporters launched a substantial social media campaign last week threatening the United States with terrorist attacks if intervened in the present crisis. Incidentally, the Twitter campaign used the awkward hashtag "calamity will befall us," wording that if one does not understand that the U.S. in the hashtag refers to the United States, makes it appear as if the group is prophesying its own destruction, which frankly is what would happen if in fact the United States got involved. Rather than analyze the Islamic State's use of the social media, a topic already well covered by M.J. Berger and others, Stratford is interested in what the threat says about the group's susceptibility to foreign intervention and the viability of its threat. Much of the focus has been on the group's audacious claim of founding a new caliphate and the seeming impunity with which it operates in the Sunni areas of Iraq. but the intensity of the organization's anti-U.S. public relations effort demonstrates how much it fears U.S. intervention. And that's the truth right there. They've made a lot of over-the-top type claims, but the bottom line is if the U.S. got involved, this group would be toast. And going on with the article says, though there has not been a significant response from the United States, it is no wonder that the Islamic State is afraid of a new U.S. intervention in Iraq. Recent history has proved how powerful the U.S. military can be in a campaign against a militant organization or a government for that matter, even if it has a small presence on the ground. Except for the Amman hotel bombings and the Fali assassination, the Islamic State's attacks have lacked sophistication and resulted in only minor casualties and damage. The group has launched some ineffective rocket attacks in Jordan, and the jihadist attacks seen to date in Lebanon have been pretty amateurs, including a Thorpe suicide bombing attempt last week when Lebanese authorities attempted to arrest the bomber at his Beirut hotel. The bottom line is that while the Islamic State has conducted successful terrorist attacks in moderately hostile places such as Arbel, Basra, and Damascus, those are places with inept or corrupt security forces relatively near to the group's bomb makers and operational commanders, and where the group has some local support networks. Even if it wanted to, the organization does not appear to have the sorts of skilled operators who can conduct operations inside the United States or Europe. Even in attacks in places like Baghdad, the Islamic State has struggled to hit hard targets in recent years. Most of its recent attacks have focused on soft targets in Shiite neighborhoods. It's questionable that it has the ability to hit the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad with a meaningful strike, let alone on the U.S. mainland. But even if that was the case, if the Islamic State was somehow able to pull off an attack in the United States or to inspire grassroots jihadists to conduct attacks there, the group could face some serious retaliation. A large attack in the United States would risk awakening what has been for the past few years a disinterested giant. Indeed, one of the important factors in the growth of the Islamic State is that the United States has not paid much attention to it. Involving the wrath of the United States would almost certainly bring a calamity upon the Islamic State, spelling the end of any Islamic polity it seeks to create. Frankly, I think all you're going to see from the Islamic State is a redrawing of the international map, and they very well may get their own little portion of a state. Whether or not the U.S. or Iraq or Syria will attempt to try to regain that land is unknown, but frankly I doubt it. I think by and large Mr. Assad will be happy with what he has, and the U.S. and Iraq will probably cut their losses and stick with what they have as well. And of course that is if the Islamic State doesn't try to make any serious advances toward Iraq, or I should say Baghdad. But as I've said many times, we should take a step back and take a look at really what's happening in the region when something like this happens, and see if it is possible that such a terrorist group could be a major threat to the known Middle East, places such as Israel or Jordan or Saudi Arabia or the like. This most recent terrorist movement seems to be nothing more than just a small-time amateuristic movement that was already established long before this date. The area in which they are now occupying was already virtually abandoned by both Syria and Iraq as it was. A kind of no man's land between Syria and Iraq that encompassed a little bit of both countries. So I wouldn't look for any real fireworks to go on between this new Islamic State, because they certainly don't want to re-energize a sleeping giant such as the United States to reoccupy in areas, maybe not sending in troops, but at least they have other major weapons that they can use, such as surveillance, such as drones, such as heavy fire from the Air Force, guided missile systems. So this isn't just a minor problem that could come upon this Islamic terrorist group. They could sustain heavy losses and lose territory relatively easy if in fact the U.S. were to get involved in a more serious manner. Now, lastly, before I go, a couple days ago, I did tell you of a show that was being produced by HBO called The Leftovers, and it was basically a show that depicted that 2% of the world's population just suddenly and without warning disappeared. Kind of the world's version of the rapture of the church. Now, 2% of the world's population is basically 150 million people. That's a significant number. But I was able to view the show. Now, I put up a message indicating that the show did have a considerable amount of adult content in it, so it probably wasn't family friendly. Now, at that point, I had not seen it, so I didn't know to what extent it was. But after viewing it, that was the case. There was a bit of scenes that I did have to fast forward through, but I still was able to get a review of what the show was all about. And as I said earlier, this is the world's version of what the rapture would be like and how the world would react to this. And frankly, I believe they did a fairly good job. Of course, the show starts out with a disappearance that takes place and people screaming, of course, wondering what happened to their lost loved ones or whatever the case may be. And of course, there's panic, but it gives the idea that the world goes on. And of course, it fast forwards at that point in time to a point in which it's about several years later, and life for the most part has moved forward. Now, keep in mind, this is not a Christian view of this time and what will follow, but it's pretty good. Now, the show continues by having what seems to be a 3-year anniversary of this event, of the disappearance, to remember those who have gone. And still at this point, they did not know and had no explanation as to where these people had gone. Now, I have to say, this is probably how I would depict how the world would be reacting once the rapture of the church took place. Of course, there would be a considerable amount of disarray and panic, but I believe, as I've always said, that the world will go on whether they want to or not. But what I found interesting, at the end, there was a scene in which a deer had stopped in the middle of the road, and one of the stars of the show stopped his vehicle, got out of the car. I thought it was strange that the deer did not run off, and then next thing you know, from the background, a bunch of dogs, wild dogs, came and viciously took this deer down and killed this deer. And this just wasn't any kind of kill. It was a ravishing, vicious, man-eating type of kill. And it seemed like a page right out of my book. In fact, that's how I describe it. When the first four seals have been opened, one of the last things that's mentioned in the 4 seals is that 1/4 of the world's population will be destroyed, and many of those who will be killed during this time will be killed by wild animals. I've always believed that when this 4th seal is open, and I describe it in my book, that the natural fear of man from all animals will be lifted. And that normal pets, and that's what these were, these dogs, normal pets would all of a sudden become vicious, man-eating killers. And that's what one of the gentlemen said who was shooting the dogs as he seen them. He says, yeah, these used to be our pets, but somehow they no longer are. And then they began shooting the dogs and killing them as they're ravishing the deer carcass. But I have to admit, just on that, that I believe that this was a good depiction of some of the events that are believed to take place during this time period. Now, certainly I'm not recommending this show because it is not a family-friendly show at all. But this first episode did give a fairly good example of the world's view of what the rapture, or they were unable to identify it, but I would say the rapture of the church. Of course, I'm sure that when time goes on that they will try to pin this disappearance upon some type of alien force. But that's my review, so you don't have to waste your time reviewing this show. And if you don't know the Lord as Savior, your time is running out. A couple days ago I got a phone call from a old friend of mine that indicated that a friend from my childhood had died suddenly of a heart attack. He wasn't that old either, but you know what? He didn't know he was going to die that day. And strangely enough, we're all in that same boat. We don't know when we're going to die. But the question is, if you were to die today, where would you spend an eternity? Now, I can tell you where you'd spend it if you don't know the Lord as Savior, and that is in a burning hell. Fortunately, I believe this person who died suddenly was a Christian. So he's in heaven right now. But you know what? If you don't know where you're going to go when you die, you need to make that decision for Christ today. Well, this is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.